Welcome back to Believers IAS Academy. In this today's particular video, the topic of the day discussion, we will be discussing about an important topic, which is absolutely important from the examination point of view, and most importantly, a very good news, for all the citizens of the India, mostly the taxpayers, right away from the Prime Minister himself, where he categorically mentioned that this is the Diwali gift in advance to the people of India. So in this today's particular video, we'll discuss about the major GST revamp that the government is trying to make, and what are the key changes that it is trying to bring, and let's also understand how this is beneficial to the people, especially the taxpayers, the honest taxpayers of the India. Okay, so talking as to why this was a news, recently it was announced in the Independence Day speech by the Prime Minister himself, where he categorically mentioned that the center is right now taking steps to reduce or to reform the GST tax slabs that we had earlier, and now the major agenda is to keep just the two tax slabs, which is the 5% and the 18%, by completely scraping off the 12% and the 28%, which obviously is a very drastic measure by the government in order to ensure that this will aid for economic growth going forward. And not just that, an additional less than 1% tax is also in the name of concessional band is also implemented. And also it talks about the creation of another tax slab, which is the 40% tax slab, solely known as the sin rate, right? So now all of these modifications are is what we will be expecting from the GST, from the recent GST council meeting, which will which is supposed to take place. And this will obviously make sure that it ensures fiscal federalism of India, and also it can be another step or another push towards making or transforming India into that country which is which has high high consumption, and it also ensures that less number of people try and evade taxes, and also to create a wider tax net, and eventually to kind of boost the revenue buoyancy, despite an initial hit that we already thought, or most of the people thought, that GST is not really working out for India as an economy, right? Because talking about GST, the only thing that we talk about or comes to our mind is that it is a regressive tax, right? It is an indirect tax, but also which is regressive in nature, which means it is same for all, right? Whether the rich or poor, the tax is the same. So unlike the direct tax, which is your income tax, which has various slabs based on the income levels of different sections of people, this GST being regressive and also having so many complicated numerous slabs were mostly regarded not so good for the common people, but now this particular reform would definitely create a change in the behavior of the consumers and also the taxpayers, making sure it would definitely help India on the long run, right? So even before that, we'll also have to try and understand what were the present revenue mix that we were getting based on the various tax slabs that we had. So roughly about 67% of GST revenue which the government was getting was mostly from the tax slabs, which is your 18%, and also 11% from the 28%, and 7% from 5%, and 5% from the 12% tax slabs. So these changes that they are trying to bring with respect to 18% and 28%, definitely would create a huge impact on the economy, is what is being argued, right? And it is also important to keep in mind that the announcement, right, was told that this was part of the next generation GST reforms during the Independence Day by the Prime Minister himself, where he pitched that it is the Diwali gift, right? Diwali gift by cutting down the taxes. It is pretty much like the Amazon gift voucher that the government is trying to give on the long run for the entire citizens of the country. So, what are the key highlights that the government is trying to make? Of course, we know the tax slabs are being changed. So, majorly we can see the restructuring of the tax slabs, especially, you know, by with this particular tax slab of 5% and 18%, considering the kind of revenue that it was incurring, and also to make sure that it accommodates or try and ensures that all the commodities that earlier were there in the 28% category and also 12% category are not treated unbiased. The idea was to make sure to amalgamate or to put all of these things in the 18% and also keep another 5% for all those tax rates which were already less, right? So they have decided, the GST councils decided, or the planning is going on to make sure that the 5% and 18% shall remain by cutting down the 12% and the 28%. And also it talks about what are the quantity of the items that it is being clubbed within this 18% and the 5%. Now if you see, 99% of the items which were earlier in the 12% have been moved to the 5% category, right? So this will definitely leave a very breathable space for the huge middle class and also the SMEs, right, the small and medium enterprises, right, and even for that matter for the consumers. This would definitely be a great relief, making sure this move would definitely increase the purchasing power of the people and eventually increases the demand in the market, ultimately making sure the economic growth, right, increases, right? And further, it also would ensure that more employment is also generated in this particular move. So this is what the government thinks. And now, with respect to the category of items which were there in the 28% earlier, approximately 90% of those items are now moved to the 18%, right? And of these, most of the goods are white goods, which makes it even more beneficial once again for the common man, for the normal consumer, right? So hence this makes absolute sense as to why the government or the Prime Minister called this a big Diwali gift for the people of the country. Now what about the policy intent, right? So this particular reduction in the tax rates tries to remove the ambiguity, because earlier having so many tax slabs, starting from your 0%, 5%, 12%, 28%, right? Then later, further, the additional cess, right? Even this was also, there in the earlier practice, where apart from the 28% taxes, especially on certain luxury items, there used to be another, invisible, or let's say, hidden tax, which is also known as cess. So this was pretty much, ambiguous for the, people, even the tax complying agents. And also this classification of various items and various, tax slabs were very, dispute oriented, was very ambiguous and was, very confusing and was very, not serving the purpose of as to what or why this GST was even introduced in the first place. So this particular reduction in tax rates, or categorizing them to just this broad 5% and the 18%, makes it more simpler and makes it more convenient for the people and for even for the tax officials also, and even for the government, to ensure that it kind of has widened the tax the tax base. As we know, this is mostly benefiting the middleman, the middle class. So it has invariably increased the tax base, which kind of is the major intention of this policy rate, ultimately to what? To boost the economy and eventually on the long run to ensure that the employment is generated, and overall to make sure that this becomes a way forward, like let's say on the long run opens door for India to achieve its 5 trillion economy as early as possible, right? So now let's talk about other few aspects, key highlights of this particular move. Here in the introduction, we spoke about this concessional rate of less than 1%, right? So these particular items, very small set of items, which are obviously not or cannot be ignored or cannot be taxed, but also it is that kind of item which also cannot be taxed too much also. For example, your normal rice, right, normal rice, let's say this is 0%, right, no tax. The same thing, the packaged rice, let's say the basmati one, the packaged rice is taxable, let's say less than 5% or even 5% for that matter, let's say 5, below the 5% mark. So now, or let's say we, for calculation computation, we'll take 1%. Let's say the packaged rice is taxed as 1% and the normal rice, unpackaged one, the loose one that you get, is 0%. So now, just because, certain commodities, or let's say now there exists only 5%, doesn't mean that, you tax this particular packaged rice which was earlier costing or earlier was charged at 1% to make it 5%, right? It is impossible. It would definitely become more costlier. The earlier packaged rice, the fully proper packed, rice that you were getting for, let's say, 100 rupees with just 1% of, GST. Now, if it is being clubbed amidst or clubbed with the 5% tax slab, obviously the price, let's say, would become 106. Would obviously, the price would be more. And also that does not mean that you put it to the, 0% category also by completely ignoring or completely not taxing it, right? That doesn't make any sense. So hence, for a very small set that today sits below 5% for few commodities, but also above 0%, right? Those commodities which are taxed below 5% and also above 0%, in order to ensure a legal home, right, for ultra low rate items without distorting the 5% slab, an additional tax category is particularly talked about, that is the concessional less than 1% tax rate, right? So that is also one extreme move by the government. And another extreme move is the addition of the sin rate, the sin tax, which is the 40% on those items which are, let's say, we can also call them demerit goods, and it talks about 5 to 6, 7, items, especially those categorizing your tobacco, BD, cigarettes, right? All of those things will now be completely charged 40% and no additional cess whatsoever. Earlier it was just 28% plus cess. So now it talks about just 40% by completely also removing the cess as well, which we will be talking in the next video. Sorry, the next slide. So it says no additional cess, right? So rates will be clean, which means just 40% everywhere in the India, right? No further complications as to what is the cess for this particular state. No, nothing like that. So the cess has been now removed, making the rates very clean, very transparent, and we also call as the label rate, right, which is the effective rate. Just 40% for all the sin items or the demerit goods, in order to maintain strong public health by disincentivizing the people to make sure that they don't use it. But of course, in India's case, no matter how costly certain items, especially tobacco, right, becomes, people definitely has this tendency to go against the economic concepts, right? Like the demand and elasticity of demand as a concept. So this particular case is just an opposite to that. So anyway, government still wants to make sure that it wants to disincentivize the use of or let's say disincentivize the people who are using these kind of goods. So 40% tax rate, and also making sure that the additional cess are now been removed to make sure the price transparency stays throughout the country, and also to reduce the computation errors, because having cess, different kind of cess, makes it absolutely difficult for computing, and also cutting the litigation around the cess applicability, right? So apart from that, right, we also have to keep in mind that it was or will definitely give a push or nudge those particular category of goods which are classified as white goods. For example, major example one we can think of is the ACs, which are now taxed under the 28% slab, will obviously be reduced, because now if the same AC are being charged 12%, sorry, yeah, 18%, sorry. So now if the same ACs are now, right, charged at 18%, right, which earlier was 28%, now it has been charged 18%, this could drastically reduce the price, and also this would, this should, or this definitely would make sure that the consumption or the number of sales with respect to ACs or any white goods for that matter increases, so that it supports manufacturing also, and it can accelerate replacement cycles with potential productivity spillovers, which ultimately ensures energy efficient devices to be manufactured more and more to the common man at the end of the day for their best use, right? So this is also another key highlight that you have to keep in mind. And lastly, it talks about the average rate falls, right? So ultimately, if you take the average of all the tax rates, right, the effective tax rates that the GST was collecting, or let's say the prior analysis pegged the average effective GST rate near to 11.6%, right? Now this would definitely shift the entire trend downwards, implying that a meaningfully lower weighted average can be seen by the reduction of this particular tax rate, right? So ultimately, this move, if you see, it tries to benefit the people by ensuring that the purchasing power is being increased, or the government is trying to increase the purchasing power of the common man, right? And also to ensure that the demand is increased in the market, to make sure that even RBI for that matter need not worry about further cutting down increasing the rates, or meddling with the present rates that we have, right? So this will also be very helpful on the long run as well, right? And another important thing that the new reform that talks about is bringing compliance and ease of living, especially in the tech field, where it ensures faster technological driven registrations, and also it talks about pre-filled returns, where they use, or the usage of e-invoicing and e-way bill data to, in order to cut short, or in order to reduce the errors and the compliance time that it takes, or that it used to take earlier for computing the entire tax regimes and all the procedures. Ultimately, the point states that this also tries to make sure that the ease of living, especially in terms of the tax compliance, and even for both the the person who is the taxpayer, and also for the agents, the tax complying officers, also to make sure this would help them in order to quickly process the tax returns and anything related to the tax, the GST, especially to make it quicker, automated refunds to ease working capital, especially for the people, the people, let's say the workers, or let's say those taxpayers in the small and medium sector enterprises overall, as to ensure that it would make the processing of the entire GST filing, the returns, everything quicker and sooner, right? By how? By including the e-invoicing and e-bill data and all that. So moving forward, we will talk about the advantages, right? What are the advantages now? First and foremost, it has made the entire tax process, the entire the compliance very lower, right? It has made it simpler. And also how? By reducing the compliance costs, because fewer slabs means simpler classification, less litigation, easier returns for filing, right? And the entire policy is demand stimulus, or let's say demand oriented, to make sure that this would create more demand in the market by ensuring that people, the prices of the commodity reduces. Doesn't mean that we're talking about disinflation here, right? Or it's not about deflation here, it's mostly about disinflation, a trend where you can see that the reduction in the inflation rates, which can be visible by this particular move, which ultimately helps all the sectors, not just that particular unit or the manufacturing unit, but all the allied sectors, including logistics, retail, finance, and also encourage technology upgrades, right, to ensure that the growth and all the other formalization takes place, right? Another important advantage is the lower evasion, wider tax net, right? So now by restructuring everything to 5% and 18%, make sure that people now would definitely try and be more prompt in terms of paying taxes, because ultimately, considering how high the tax was earlier for certain key essential goods, chances of tax evasion was very high. So now that earlier which was taxed at 28%, now it is 18%. So prices are decreased, and in a way people will definitely try to buy more such components. Take for example AC, or let's say washing machine, right? So people will obviously now definitely buy if the prices go down, and if they buy, obviously 18%, the commodities that they buy will be taxed under 18%, which in a way will definitely boost or let's say kind of increases the tax net, as more number of people will start buying. So if at least the government is not making enough revenue in terms of higher GST figure, but just because of the wider tax net, even then a balance would be created, as what the government thinks, right? And talking about the another advantage, it's the predictability for investors. Now having a very stable and a simpler tax regime will obviously reduce pricing uncertainty, and on the long term, right, it helps, and it makes sure to improve India's tax policy credibility, which will be very positive for domestic and foreign investment, right? So that is also important. And also keep in mind that it will also definitely help give liquidity relief, as we have already discussed, that automated refunds, right, by e-filing and all of that. It reduces the working capital lockups and also lower interest costs, and can also ultimately improve the competitiveness in the market, especially for exporters and other sectors associated with that, right? And we discuss about this. It would definitely reduce the inflation effect for the consumers, especially on the long run, because of the decrease in the price levels, right? So that is what the point says. Now talking about the because any policy reforms will definitely come with risks, right? So talking about few disadvantages, this one particular move, at least in the short run, will definitely be a huge hit. It will be a huge blow on the pockets of the government, because right now categorizing those items, or moving those items from 28% to 18% and 12% to 5%, right, will drastically reduce the income of the government, right, in terms of how much they were collecting. So now if the elasticity based rebound is weaker, right, than expected, fiscal deficit pressures could intensify. So what the government thinks is that although they have tried to reduce the tax rates with respect to majority of the items, talking about the items 99%, and then 99% of 12% items, and then 90% of 28% tax slab items now have been clapped to 18 and 5%. Obviously government will definitely be seeing a very huge reduction in the amount of tax that it is collecting. And but still the government also thinks that this reduction in the tax rate, or changing this tax rate, or putting them in the fewer lesser tax slabs, they think that this would increase the consumption, right? This would increase the consumption and ultimately balance the loss that it would have otherwise incurred by reducing the tax slabs, right? So that is what it says, that if the elasticity base rebound is weaker than expected, then if let's say even though the tax slabs have been reduced, now if still the people are not consuming or not buying the stuffs, then it would definitely be very problematic, or the fiscal deficit of the government will definitely widen, is what they say. But also government is very optimistic, and these kind of reforms needs an optimistic approach where you have to think on the long run. And definitely going by the nerves of the middle class in India, especially when you reduce the tax rates, when the price, or let's say the price of a particular commodity goes down, obviously demand increases, right? And more number of people will buy. Even then if the prices in terms of not being too high, if the government is not making much profit out of it, at least in terms of demand, if more number of people are trying to purchase it, even then the loss will be offsetted, right? So this is what one thing. But once again, this depends on how the consumers handle this, and it depends on the consumer behavior, right? So this is one of the demerit. At least in the short term, it will definitely hit the pockets of the government. Then it talks about the state and the center coordination challenges, because in order to ensure that this big of a change is implemented, right, states with consumption baskets tilted towards currently which is those items which are taxed very high may fear disproportionate losses, right? And this is difficult, or this is important to understand. The state compliance is also ensured to achieve that consensus in the GST council meeting, to be able to get an idea as to how carefully the policies are to be calibrated and implemented. So getting that center state coordination or consensus in fixing these slabs, right, would be slightly difficult, but going forward we'll have to see what that happens. And another demerit would be the pass-through uncertainty. Although the government has implemented it, right, without the proper or effective oversight, firms may not fully pass on the tax cuts. Although the government has cut down the taxes, it depends on at the retail level as to if the retailers are ready to pass it on to the consumers as well, right? Now let's say if the competition is very high, if there is more competition, then obviously the prices will reduce, the retailers will try to reduce the prices, and also at the end of the day it will increase the consumption based on the competitive pricing concept. But if the particular retailer or the firms which are responsible to pass it down to the common man does not do it, then the problem will be with respect to the consumption. I mean, there will be definitely not much consumption boost that we can see, and also inflation relief also will definitely be not expected, right? So that is one of the demerit. Behavioral effects of sin rate, this is another demerit. Now just because there is 40% tax rate on all these so-called essential commodities for a particular category of people, now this could encourage, because now the government is taxing 40%, now there will always be a side route, right, like a bypass. So now this would encourage illicit trade if the proper enforcement is not taken care of, right? So now the government also should come up with more stricter border rules, in order to ensure that illicit trade doesn't happen, right? So that is also one important demerit. So at the end of the day, we have to ensure that anything and everything that the government is trying to do, right, has to be properly calibrated with respect to how it affects the common man, and also to make sure that the relation between center and state, in terms of cooperative federalism, is also not harmed. It talks about how the stages, and also to ensure that the cooperative federalism is not put at stake. It is important that these implementations happen in at the stage by stage level, by understanding the way it is working. Like let's say for example, first give concession with all the white goods, right, and then allow the industry lead time for systems to updates, and then issue then a proper detailed analysis is made based on how the consumers are reacting with respect to the sudden change, and based on that to further minimize or bring down that 12% category to 5%. So that is one of the important thing to keep in mind. And then the in order to also ensure the revenue safeguards, it is also important to have a real-time dashboard for collection trends by state and sector, agree to in order to agree on temporary revenue assurance mechanisms and data-driven triggers for mid-course correction if buoyancy lags. So that is also important. And at the end, we have to also try and ensure that the compliance, the tax compliance is well taken care of. We have to ensure that the e-invoicing mechanism expands, right, increases, and also we have to ensure that the pre-filled GST, 3B, and all those things for the taxpayers, which we have made it more easy, that the rollout should be properly happening in order to make sure or enhance risk-based scrutiny to curb evasion without burdening the complainant, right? So these are all the way forward that is supposed to be looked at. And if we see few other things, it is to ensure consumer pass-through. As we said, proper regulation should be brought, or let's say in order to ensure anti-profiteering mechanisms at the retail level, just to ensure that even if the government has reduced tax, but it is not passed to the common man by the retailers, so even that has to be taken care by enabling quick grievance channels, and in order to also make sure that the proper oversight is kept on these kind of things to deter retention of tax cuts in margins at various levels. Also, it is important to monitor macro impacts in order to make sure that this is going as expected. It is important to track the inflation, the consumption data, and the investment responses at quarterly stages, and then see how this is performing. And also it has to be published in order to ensure that the transparent assessments are taken care of, to make sure that it builds more credibility and inform any fine tuning, right? So that is also important. Lastly, talks about the legal and administrative alignment, where you have to talk about the prepare timely CGST and SGST rule amendments in order to ensure that these changes are properly accommodating. And also it is important to synchronize the HSN codes and coordinate with customs tariffs to avoid cross tax anomalies, right? So this is all with respect to this particular video, and in order to ensure that this particular move from the government is being fruitful for the end user. Of course, it comes with a lot of risks, and any reform, it always comes with risk. But a proper, well calibrated approach from the government will always definitely ensure that this one nation, one tax concept would be more viable for a country like India, which is planning to become the 5 trillion economy in the very near future, right? So let's see how this will actually perform in reality. So anyway, that's all for today's video. For more such informative content, please do subscribe Believers IAS YouTube channel. And this is all for today. Signing off, this is Madan Gopal. Have a beautiful day.